The small town of Brookhaven woke up to a cloudy morning in early 2026. A light fog covered the narrow streets and the sound of distant church bells echoed through the sleepy air. It was the day of the town's long-awaited estate auction, an event that only happened once every few years. People from nearby towns had gathered to see what treasures might be hidden inside the old Waverly house, a mansion that had stood silent for nearly half a century. The house was a grand, crumbling thing on the hill, its windows dusty and its garden overgrown with weeds. The locals often said it was haunted, though no one ever proved it. Even so, the story gave the auction a mysterious excitement. People whispered about what they might find inside: rare paintings, antique clocks, or perhaps old letters from the past. Among the crowd was a young woman named Eleanor Grace, a music teacher from the local elementary school. She was in her late 20s, quiet, kind, and always seen with a small notebook in hand where she scribbled ideas for songs. She didn't come to buy anything expensive. She only wanted to find something with history, something that spoke to her heart. Eleanor loved old things because, as she often said, they carried whispers of forgotten stories. The auctioneer, a short man with a red scarf and a booming voice, stood at the front steps calling out bids. The crowd moved through the house, exploring rooms filled with dust and fading light. There were cracked mirrors, chipped teacups, boxes of photographs, and shelves filled with books whose pages had turned yellow with age. Each item sold quickly. People laughed, bargained, and shouted numbers. The atmosphere was cheerful but a little eerie, as if the house itself was watching. In the corner of the grand hallway stood something most people ignored: a large, covered shape, wrapped in a gray sheet and resting on 3 broken legs. A faint outline showed its curved body and long lid. Eleanor noticed it right away. She felt a strange pull toward it. She stepped closer and gently lifted a corner of the cloth. Beneath it was a grand piano covered in dust, its once shiny surface now dull and cracked. The auctioneer noticed her curiosity and called out, "Ah yes, the piano. No one knows where it came from. Must have been left here decades ago, barely playable now." He laughed lightly. The crowd lost interest and moved to another room. But Eleanor stayed. Her hand brushed against the keys, which made a faint broken sound still. There was something about it, something sad and beautiful, as if the instrument had been waiting for someone to find it. She asked quietly, "Does anyone know who owned it?" The auctioneer shrugged. "Records say it was here when the last owner bought the house in the 1970s. Before that, who knows, maybe it belonged to the original family." He looked around and smiled. "You can have it cheap if you want, miss. No one else is bidding." Eleanor hesitated. She didn't really have much money. Her salary as a teacher barely covered her small apartment and her mother's medicines. But the piano called to her in a way she couldn't explain. She felt it deep in her chest, like the feeling you get when a melody touches your heart before you even hear it. $50, she said softly. "Sold." The auctioneer announced with a grin. The crowd clapped politely, not because they cared about the piano, but because they liked seeing a good deal. Eleanor smiled shyly, feeling a mix of joy and nervousness. She had no idea how she would move the heavy instrument, but she knew she had to later that afternoon. 2 movers helped her transport the piano to the music room of the school where she taught. It took great effort. The legs wobbled and the lid creaked with every motion. When they finally set it down near the window, Eleanor paid them and watched as the sunlight fell across the piano's surface, revealing faint carvings along the wood that she hadn't noticed before. They looked like initials, but she couldn't quite make them out through the dust. She spent hours that evening cleaning it, wiping away years of dirt and cobwebs. Under the grime, the wood still held a soft golden glow. She polished each key carefully, humming as she worked. Some keys were stuck. Others made dull thuds instead of clear notes. Yet each sound felt alive, as if trying to speak after years of silence. When she lifted the lid to check inside, a gentle scent of old paper and varnish filled the air. She smiled, thinking about how many hands must have touched these keys before her, how many songs might have filled rooms like this one long ago. As the sun set outside, Eleanor sat on the stool, straightened her back, and pressed a few notes. The sound was uneven, but she didn't mind. The broken melody echoed softly in the empty room. She closed her eyes and let her fingers wander, creating something between a song and a memory, just as she was about to stop. Her hand brushed against something rough under the lid. She frowned and reached inside, feeling a small piece of paper wedged between the wood and the frame. It was thin and yellow, almost fragile. She pulled it out gently and unfolded it. The writing was faint, but she could still read a few words. "For the future player," it said. Eleanor froze, her heartbeat quickened. She stared at the note, wondering who had written it, and when. She looked at the piano again, this time not as an old instrument, but as a mystery waiting to be solved. The fog had long lifted outside and through the window. The moonlight touched the keys, making them shimmer softly. That night, she locked the classroom and walked home under the streetlights, the little note safely tucked in her coat pocket. She didn't know it yet, but that single decision to bid on an old piano would change her life, and the history of Brookhaven, forever. When Eleanor returned to school the next morning, she could not stop thinking about the old piano and the note she had found. The words for the future player repeated in her mind like a melody she couldn't forget. It felt almost like an invitation, or maybe a secret meant for her alone. The classroom was still quiet when she walked in. The sunlight poured through the tall windows, making golden dust dance in the air. The piano sat exactly where she had left it, proud but tired, like an old storyteller waiting to speak again. She smiled softly and whispered, "Good morning, old friend," as if it could hear her. She opened the lid carefully and stared inside. Everything looked old but beautiful. Strings stretched across like silver threads, wooden beams darkened with time, and the smell, like a mix of dust, wood, and something faintly sweet, reminded her of old libraries and forgotten songs. She reached for her cleaning cloth again, determined to finish what she had started. As she wiped the inside panels, her eyes caught something unusual. Just beneath the inner lid, carved faintly into the wood, were a few letters and numbers. She leaned closer and squinted, her fingers tracing the faded marks. LH, 1942, she whispered aloud. The letters were carved with care, not random scratches, not the marks of a child, but something deliberate. It looked like initials, maybe the name of the person who once owned the piano. Her heart raced a little. She remembered the note and wondered if LH was the one who had written it. She quickly took out her phone and snapped a picture, then pulled a notebook from her bag. She began writing down everything she saw. The carvings, the note, even the smell of the wood. Eleanor liked keeping records of her discoveries. It made her feel like an explorer uncovering a hidden past. Later that afternoon, after her classes ended, she sat alone in the room and tried to play a few notes again. The sound was still rough, but as her fingers moved across the keys, she noticed something else. One of the keys, middle C, felt slightly heavier than the others. She pressed it again, and a faint metallic sound came from underneath. Curious, she leaned down and looked inside. Something was wedged between the strings and the frame. It looked like a piece of folded paper or maybe fabric. Using a pair of tweezers from the art cabinet, she carefully pulled it out. It was an envelope, yellowed and delicate, the kind people used in the 1940s. On the front were the same initials, LH, written in faded blue ink. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a small sheet of music written by hand. The notes were neat but emotional, as if the writer had poured their soul into them. Across the top it read, "For those who find my song." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her arms. It was no ordinary song. The notes were arranged in an unusual way, the melody rising and falling with sadness and longing. She could almost hear it in her mind, though she had never seen such a composition before. At the bottom of the sheet, there was another line written faintly, "Remember me through this." She sat silently for a long time. Staring at the page, the room around her seemed to disappear. Only the piano, the music, and the memory of someone long gone remained. She wondered who LH was, a composer, a pianist, or maybe someone who had loved music as deeply as she did. That night, Eleanor took the sheet music home. She placed it carefully on her kitchen table under a lamp. She searched the name online. LH pianist, 1942, Brookhaven. Hundreds of results appeared, but most were unrelated. She scrolled until one old article caught her attention. It was from the Brookhaven Chronicle. Dated 1943, the headline read, "Local composer Leonard Hayes missing in Europe." Eleanor's eyes widened. She began to read. According to the article, Leonard Hayes was a young pianist and composer who had lived in Brookhaven before joining the war effort overseas. He was known for writing songs of hope for the townspeople during hard times. But after his last performance in 1942, he vanished. No one ever heard from him again. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. The initials, the year, the music, everything fit together. It couldn't be a coincidence. She looked at the piano again in her mind, wondering how it had survived all these years. Perhaps it had once belonged to Leonard himself. Maybe it was the same instrument he composed on the next day. She visited the Brookhaven Historical Society, a small brick building near the town square. An elderly man named Mr. Porter greeted her at the front desk. He had worked there for decades and knew every story the town had ever told. When Eleanor mentioned Leonard Hayes, his eyes lit up. "Ah, Leonard," he said softly. "A genius and a kind soul. He used to play at the old town hall. My grandmother told me about his final piece, something he never got to perform before he left. They called it the Brookhaven Sonata, but no one ever found it." Eleanor's heart pounded. She showed him the photograph of the initials and the envelope. Mr. Porter adjusted his glasses and smiled gently. "That piano you found, young lady, might be the key to solving an 80-year-old mystery." When she returned to the school, the piano seemed to greet her differently. The sunlight fell perfectly on its keys, and she could almost imagine a young man sitting there decades ago, playing the same notes she now held in her hands. She ran her fingers along the carving again, whispering Leonard Hayes at that moment. She made a quiet promise she would find out everything about him, about the song he left behind and about why it was hidden. She didn't know yet that the story buried inside that piano would soon bring the entire town of Brookhaven together and change her own life in ways she could never have imagined. The night after Eleanor discovered the name Leonard Hayes, she could hardly sleep. The story of the mysterious pianist played in her mind again and again. Who was he really? And why did his music end up hidden inside a piano forgotten for more than 80 years? The questions kept her awake until the early morning. By sunrise, she was sitting at her kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee, staring at the sheet music spread before her. The handwriting was beautiful but old-fashioned. Each note seemed to carry emotion. Every line of melody felt alive, as if Leonard himself had written it only yesterday. She could almost imagine him, a young man sitting by candlelight in 1942, composing a song filled with longing and hope. When she reached the school that morning, she couldn't wait to share what she had found. Her friend and fellow teacher, Mr. Collins, walked into her classroom carrying his violin case. He noticed the excitement on her face. "You look like you just solved a mystery," he said, laughing. Eleanor smiled. Maybe I did, and told him everything, the initials, the note, the music, and the name she had found. Mr. Collins whistled softly. "Leonard Hayes," he said. "My grandmother used to talk about him. She said he played piano at the town hall before the war. People adored his music, but then he just disappeared." Eleanor nodded, her curiosity growing stronger. She opened her laptop and began searching again, this time more carefully. After an hour of reading through old archives and news clippings, she found more pieces of the story. Leonard Hayes had been born in Brookhaven in 1918, the son of a carpenter and a schoolteacher. From a young age, he showed remarkable talent for music. By the time he was 10, he could play classical pieces by ear. By 15, he was composing his own. His performances became the pride of the small town. There were black and white photos of him, a handsome young man with neatly combed hair, sitting at a piano, a gentle smile on his face. He performed in small concerts to raise funds for families affected by the war. People said his music brought light to dark times. One article even called him the heart of Brookhaven. But then, in 1942, he volunteered to join the army, leaving behind his piano, his music, and the people who loved him. The paper said he promised to return for one last concert, but he never did. His ship was reported missing in 1943, and no trace of him was ever found. Eleanor sat back, her heart heavy. She imagined the sorrow the town must have felt, their brightest star gone, his songs left unfinished. But then she remembered the piano and the sheet music she had found. Maybe, she thought, Leonard had hidden his final work before leaving. Maybe he wanted someone to find it someday, someone who could bring it back to life. That evening, Eleanor visited Mrs. Whitaker, one of the oldest residents of Brookhaven. The woman was in her 90s and lived in a small cottage near the lake. Her mind was still sharp and her memory stretched back decades. When Eleanor mentioned Leonard Hayes, Mrs. Whitaker's eyes sparkled. "Oh, Leonard," she said softly, her voice trembling with fondness. "He was such a gentle soul, always playing that old piano of his at the Waverly House. I remember the night before he left for the war. He performed one of his unfinished pieces at the community hall. It was beautiful but sad, like he already knew he wouldn't be coming back." Eleanor listened closely, her heart pounding. "Do you remember what the song was called?" she asked. Mrs. Whitaker closed her eyes, thinking. "Something about the town. I think," she said, "yes. The Brookhaven Sonata, that's what he named it. But no one ever heard the full version after he left. The music disappeared. Eleanor could hardly breathe. That was the same name written on the back of the sheet music she had found. "Mrs. Whitaker," she whispered. "I think I found it." The old woman opened her eyes wide, tears glistening in them. "Oh, my dear," she said, "then you found a piece of our history." Leonard's music was the heart of this town. He made people believe in hope, even when everything felt lost. When Eleanor returned home, she sat at her piano, the same one Leonard had played all those years ago. The moonlight shone through the window and fell across the keys. She placed the fragile sheet music in front of her and touched the first note gently. It made a soft, trembling sound, but it was enough to fill her chest with emotion. As she began to play the melody, something strange happened. The music seemed to flow naturally, as if her hands already knew where to go. The tune was haunting and beautiful. It spoke of love, loss, and longing. It was like Leonard was speaking through her across time. Every note carried a story. Every pause felt like a breath from the past. When she finished, she sat in silence, her eyes filled with tears. She realized she wasn't just playing music. She was bringing someone's voice back to life, someone who had been gone for 80 years. The next morning, she decided to visit the local library again to see if any records mentioned Leonard's family. The librarian, a cheerful woman named Clara, helped her look through old genealogy records. After some searching, they found a name, Margaret Hayes, Leonard's younger sister, who had married and moved away to another state. Her last known address was from 1980. No further records were found. Eleanor sat quietly for a moment, staring at the paper. Maybe Leonard's family was still out there somewhere. Maybe someone still remembered him. She decided she would try to find them, if she could tell them what she had found. His piano, his music, it might mean more than she could imagine. As she left the library, the wind blew softly through the town square, carrying with it the faint echo of a melody. It felt like the town itself was waking up from a long dream, and somewhere, perhaps in spirit, Leonard Hayes was smiling, knowing that his music had finally been found. Eleanor walked home, the sheet music held tightly in her bag. She didn't yet know that this was only the beginning. The piano had more secrets to reveal, and Brookhaven was about to remember a story that had been buried for generations. Eleanor arrived at school early that morning. The winter air was cool and fresh, the kind that carried a soft silence before the town fully woke up. She unlocked the classroom and walked straight to the piano, her steps slow but eager. It stood there in the golden light, waiting for her, like a friend guarding a secret. She ran her fingers gently across the smooth wooden surface, whispering, "Good morning, Leonard." She had started talking to the piano as if it were alive, and somehow it didn't feel strange anymore. It felt natural, comforting. She sat down on the stool and opened the lid again. The initials LH 1942 gleamed faintly under the sunlight, almost glowing. For days she had been thinking about Leonard Hayes and the music he left behind. She couldn't stop wondering if there was more. The letter and the sheet music had come from hidden places. What if the piano still had more secrets? What if something else was still waiting to be found? Her curiosity turned into determination. She decided she would check every inch of the piano, carefully and respectfully. She didn't want to damage it. This was history, after all. She gathered a small set of tools from the art supply room, a flashlight, a brush, and a screwdriver, and began her careful search. She started by lifting the piano lid fully and peering inside. Dust floated in the air like tiny stars. She used the brush to clear it away and noticed small screws and panels that could be opened. Behind the front board there was an unusual seam, something that didn't quite fit with the rest of the frame. She tapped it gently and a hollow sound echoed back. Her heart skipped a beat with steady hands. She loosened the screws and removed the narrow wooden panel. It slid out with a soft creak behind it. Hidden in a space no bigger than a drawer lay a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Eleanor gasped quietly. For a moment she couldn't move. It felt like she was touching the past itself. She lifted the bundle onto the desk and unwrapped it carefully. Inside were several sheets of paper tied together with a ribbon. The pages were yellowed but surprisingly well preserved. On the top page, written in elegant handwriting, were the words, "The Brookhaven Sonata," by Leonard Hayes. 1942, her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe what she was holding. This wasn't just a fragment like before. This was the complete piece. The full version of the song Leonard had never performed. The lost sonata that the town had spoken about for generations. She touched the edges gently, her fingertips trembling. The notes on the page were different from any music she had seen before. There was passion in every mark, every line seemed alive. Some pages had little scribbles in the margins, small comments, emotional words like "for her," "play softly here," and the farewell. It felt deeply personal, as if Leonard had written this for someone he loved. She sat back, her heart heavy with emotion. Maybe this music wasn't just for the town. Maybe it was also a message for one person. Maybe the mysterious her was someone he had left behind before going to war. The thought made Eleanor's eyes sting with tears. Just then, Mr. Collins entered the room holding a cup of coffee. "You're here early again," he said with a grin. Then he noticed the stack of papers on her desk. "What's that?" Eleanor smiled, her voice trembling slightly. "The rest of it," she said. "I found the full sonata." He stared in disbelief, then walked over and gently picked up one of the pages. This is incredible," he said softly. "Do you realize what this means? This could be the only surviving work of Leonard Hayes. The one everyone thought was lost." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. They spent the next hour examining each sheet, trying to piece together the music in order. Some pages were faded, and a few had smudges where ink had bled through the paper. Still, the melody was clear, rich, emotional and haunting. It began softly, full of hope, then grew darker and more dramatic, like a story of love and loss told without words. Later that day, they took the sheets to the Brookhaven Historical Society, where Mr. Porter listened carefully as Eleanor explained how she found them. His eyes widened as she laid the music on the table. "My goodness," he whispered, "you found it." "The real Brookhaven Sonata," he called in two other members of the society, and soon the small room was filled with murmurs of awe. Mr. Porter smiled warmly. "You've done something remarkable, Miss Grace. You've brought back a part of our town's soul." Eleanor blushed, unsure what to say. "It wasn't me," she said softly. "It was him. He just needed someone to listen." That evening, Eleanor took the piano keys for another try. She placed the first few pages of the sonata before her and began to play. The music filled the empty classroom like a living spirit. Soft at first, then rising, the melody flowed like water. Moving through sorrow and hope, the notes echoed against the walls and drifted out the open window into the quiet street. Outside, a few people passing by stopped to listen. They couldn't see her, but they could hear the music. A tune that felt strangely familiar, like something their grandparents might have hummed long ago. By the time she finished, there were tears in her eyes. She looked at the piano and smiled. "I think we found your voice again, Leonard," she whispered. When she closed the lid that night, she felt a sense of peace and pride. But deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end. The sonata still had a story to tell, one she didn't yet understand. What did "for her" mean? And who was Leonard really writing for? She didn't know it yet, but those answers were coming, and they would change not only her life, but the heart of the entire town, forever. The news spread faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, everyone in Brookhaven was talking about the music teacher who had found the lost sonata of Leonard Hayes. People whispered about it in the bakery and the post office, even at the old diner where townsfolk gathered for morning coffee. It was as if the town itself had woken up from a long, quiet sleep. Eleanor didn't mean to cause attention. She only wanted to learn more about Leonard's story. But the discovery had touched something deep inside the townspeople. It reminded them of their past, of family stories told by grandparents, of dances in the old hall, of music that once filled the air before the war stole it away. One afternoon, as Eleanor finished her last class, the principal, Mrs. Turner, called her to the office. She was an older woman with kind eyes and a voice that always sounded like she knew more than she said. She smiled as Eleanor walked in. "You've caused quite a stir, my dear," she said warmly. "The town council heard about your discovery, and they'd like to meet you." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "Meet me? Why?" Mrs. Turner leaned back in her chair. "Because, Eleanor, what you found isn't just old paper. It's a piece of who we are. Leonard Hayes was part of Brookhaven's heart, and you've brought that heart back to life." That evening, Eleanor attended a small meeting at the Brookhaven Town Hall, the same building where Leonard had once played concerts so many years ago. The walls were lined with black and white photographs of the town's past, faces of soldiers, farmers, teachers, and musicians. She recognized Leonard in one of them, standing beside a piano, smiling confidently at the camera. The mayor, Mr. Caldwell, shook her hand and thanked her for preserving something so valuable. "The town would like to help restore the piano properly," he said. "And we think it would be wonderful if the sonata could be performed publicly, as it was meant to be." Eleanor's heart fluttered with both excitement and fear. The thought of playing such an emotional piece in front of everyone felt overwhelming. But she knew it was the right thing to do. In the following weeks, the restoration began. The piano was taken to Mr. Dalton, a skilled craftsman who repaired antique instruments. His small workshop smelled of varnish and old wood when Eleanor visited. He was already carefully polishing the body of the piano. "You've got a real treasure here," he said, running his hand along the frame. "The wood's solid, the strings are tired, but I can bring them back, and when I do, it'll sing again." While the piano was being repaired, Eleanor worked every night on learning the Brookhaven Sonata. She spent hours studying Leonard's notes, trying to understand his emotions. She could feel the story within the music. The beginning was bright and full of hope. The middle was stormy and desperate. And the end was tender, like a quiet goodbye. It felt like the song of a man who loved deeply but knew he might never return home. Sometimes, while playing, she would pause and stare at the page where Leonard had written for her. She wondered who the mysterious woman was. Perhaps a lover, perhaps someone who inspired his music. She wished she could ask him, but all she could do was listen to the voice he left behind through his notes. The town, too, began to change. Volunteers came together to clean up the old community hall, where the performance would take place. Local painters repaired peeling walls. Children helped polish chairs, and older residents shared stories of what the hall had once been. A place of joy, laughter, and dancing. People started smiling more, talking more, as if Leonard's music had given them something to believe in again. The day of the concert was set for April 14th, 2026, exactly 84 years after Leonard's last scheduled performance before he disappeared. Flyers went up all around town with a picture of a grand piano and the title, The Brookhaven Sonata, performed for the first time. Beneath it was Eleanor's name. Though she felt shy seeing it, she also felt proud. When the piano was finally returned to the school, it looked almost new. Its dark wood gleamed under the light, and when she pressed the keys, the sound rang clear and pure. She couldn't help but whisper, "Welcome back," as if the piano had been asleep and was finally awake. One evening, as she practiced in the empty classroom, she noticed a shadow in the doorway. It was Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly woman who had known Leonard as a girl. She smiled softly and said, "I wanted to hear what it sounds like again." Eleanor invited her in, and as she began to play the first movement of the sonata, Mrs. Whitaker closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. When the song ended, she whispered, "That's it. That's the sound I remember, oh Leonard, you beautiful boy." Eleanor felt her own throat tighten for the first time. She truly understood what this music meant to the people of Brookhaven. It wasn't just a song, it was memory itself, the sound of a past that refused to be forgotten. In the weeks leading up to the concert, the excitement grew. Local newspapers wrote stories. Old photographs of Leonard appeared in shop windows, and the entire town seemed to be breathing in rhythm with the upcoming event. Even people who had long since lost interest in music found themselves humming again. On the night before the performance, Eleanor stayed late. Sitting beside the piano under the soft glow of the classroom lamp, she placed her hand over the engraved initials, LH 1942, on and whispered, "Tomorrow your song will be heard again, Leonard." A tear rolled down her cheek, not of sadness but of gratitude. She didn't know it yet. But the moment that music touched the air in the hall the next evening, something far greater than applause would follow. Leonard Hayes's final composition would not only fill the room, it would awaken the heart of an entire town and uncover one final secret that had been waiting in silence all these years. The days leading up to the concert passed like a dream. The whole town was buzzing with excitement. But for Eleanor, time felt slower. She spent every free moment at the school, practicing the Brookhaven Sonata until her fingers trembled. Each time she played, she felt closer to Leonard Hayes, as if he were guiding her hand through every note. The restored piano sat proudly at the center of the music room. Shining beneath the warm glow of sunlight, it no longer looked like the tired, broken instrument she had found months ago. Now it stood tall and elegant, its wood polished to a deep golden brown, the keys smooth and bright when Eleanor pressed them. The sound that came out was pure, rich, and full of life, like the piano itself had been reborn. Mr. Dalton, the craftsman who had repaired it, visited one afternoon to check his final touches. He ran his hand along the frame and smiled proudly. "She's perfect now," he said. "This isn't just wood and strings. It's a voice from the past. You've given it back its purpose." "Miss Grace?" Eleanor smiled gratefully. "I think it gave me something too," she whispered. As the days passed, more people came to visit the restored piano. Students peeked in after class, teachers stopped by just to listen as Eleanor practiced. Even strangers from nearby towns came after hearing about the discovery. The sound of Leonard's music echoed through the halls. Filling every corner of the old building, people said it made them feel something. Peace, nostalgia, maybe even love, one afternoon. While Eleanor was rehearsing, a small group of elderly residents came to watch. Among them was Mrs. Whitaker, holding a bouquet of white lilies. She sat quietly in the front row as Eleanor played. The melody flowed softly, each note carrying the emotions Leonard had left behind. When Eleanor finished, Mrs. Whitaker clapped gently, her voice trembling. "He would be proud of you, my dear. Truly proud," she said, wiping her eyes. But even with all the beauty and excitement, Eleanor couldn't shake a feeling that the piano still held one last secret. She didn't know why. It was just a quiet instinct. Something in the way the low keys hummed differently, or the faint vibration she felt beneath her fingertips one evening after rehearsal. She decided to look again. The classroom was empty. The soft orange light of sunset filled the room. She placed her ear near the strings and pressed one of the bass keys. A deep hum filled the air, and there it was again. A faint rattling sound. She frowned, pressing the same key twice more. It was subtle, but definitely there. Something small was still hidden inside. Her heart began to race. She reached for her small flashlight and carefully opened the front panel. It came loose easily this time inside near the bottom corner. Something glimmered faintly between two wooden beams. She reached in gently and pulled it out. It was a small metal locket, dusty and cold, the chain tangled, the back engraved with the initials LH. Eleanor gasped softly. She opened it carefully. Inside was a tiny black and white photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a bright smile. Her hair tied neatly, she looked gentle and full of life. On the other side of the locket was a folded slip of paper, worn and fragile. Eleanor unfolded it slowly and read the faded words. "For you, my heart, until the song is finished." She sat back. Her hands trembling, tears welled in her eyes. It was clear now. Leonard hadn't just written the Brookhaven Sonata for the town. He had written it for her. The woman in the picture, whoever she was, she had been the love he left behind, the one he never returned to. Eleanor held the locket to her chest and whispered, "You never got to give this to her, did you?" The next morning, she brought the locket to Mr. Porter at the Historical Society. He studied it through his magnifying glass and smiled sadly. "This must be her," he said. "Her name was Clara Monroe. She was a school teacher here like you. She and Leonard were engaged before he went off to war. After he disappeared, she never married. She kept teaching until she passed away in 1984. Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. "So this was meant for her," she whispered. Mr. Porter nodded, and somehow, fate decided that another teacher, one who loves music, would find it, maybe so that Leonard's love could finally be heard. That night, Eleanor returned to the piano with a heavier heart, but a deeper purpose. She placed the locket gently on top of the instrument and began to play. This time she didn't just play the notes. She told their story. The melody rose and fell like two voices speaking across time, one saying goodbye, the other waiting forever. It was haunting yet beautiful, and by the end Eleanor was crying openly. The next few days were filled with preparation for the concert. The hall was decorated with soft lights and photographs of Brookhaven's past. Local florists brought flowers, students helped arrange chairs, and townspeople donated candles to line the stage. The piano was placed in the center, its polished body reflecting the gentle glow of lanterns. On the final rehearsal night, Eleanor stayed late again. Sitting quietly by the piano, the hall empty except for her, she whispered softly, "Leonard, tomorrow your song will finally be heard, and so will hers." She touched the locket once more and smiled through her tears. "You both deserve that." As she walked home under the moonlight, she could almost hear faint piano notes in the breeze. Echoing through the quiet streets, the sound was warm and gentle, like a whisper of thanks from another time. The town had waited 84 years for this moment. And now, thanks to one forgotten piano, one determined teacher, and one unfinished love story, Brookhaven was about to witness something truly magical. something that would bring the past and the present together in one unforgettable song. The evening of the concert arrived. The air in Brookhaven was crisp and cool. The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. The town hall stood glowing under strings of soft yellow lights, its windows shining warmly against the twilight. For the first time in decades, every seat inside was filled. People from every corner of town had come, young and old, some dressed in their best clothes, others in simple sweaters, but all carrying the same sense of excitement. They whispered quietly to each other, their voices soft, almost reverent, like they were about to witness something sacred. At the center of the stage stood the restored piano, polished and proud, its golden brown body gleaming under the spotlight. Beside it stood Eleanor Grace, her hands trembling slightly, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it echoing in her ears. Mrs. Whitaker sat in the front row, clutching a handkerchief, her eyes already misty. Beside her sat Mr. Porter from the Historical Society and Mayor Caldwell, who looked both nervous and proud. The mayor leaned toward the microphone and said, "Tonight we come together not just for music, but for memory, for the soul of our town, for Leonard Hayes, whose song returns home tonight." The audience applauded softly, the sound like rain against leaves, gentle but full of emotion. Eleanor took a deep breath and sat at the piano. The hall fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. She placed the locket, Leonard's locket, gently on top of the piano, the tiny photograph of Clara Monroe hidden inside, and whispered to herself, "This is for both of you." Then she lifted her hands to the keys. The first notes of the Brookhaven Sonata floated through the air. Soft and tender, the melody began like a whisper, gentle as the morning breeze. The audience leaned forward, listening closely. It felt as if the piano was speaking, not through sound alone, but through emotion. Every note told a story. Every pause felt like a heartbeat. As the music grew, the story deepened. The melody danced, bright and full of hope, like the laughter of two lovers under a summer sky. Then slowly it began to darken, the rhythm heavy and slow, echoing the sorrow of farewell. Eleanor could almost see Leonard sitting there beside her, playing alongside her, his hands ghosting over the keys, his eyes filled with love and regret. The hall was utterly still. Even the children didn't move. The notes rose higher and higher, filling the space with emotion so thick it felt like time itself had stopped in the middle of the song. Eleanor glanced toward the locket, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw a reflection, a young man in an old suit smiling gently from the polished wood. She blinked and it was gone, but her heart raced with warmth as the piece reached its final movement. The tone changed again. It became soft, fragile, like a conversation between heaven and earth, each note fading into the next, until the final melody arrived, a tender lullaby, quiet and pure, the same few bars that Leonard had marked on the page with the words "for her." Eleanor played them slowly, each key a whisper of devotion. The hall was filled with the sound of love that had waited 84 years to be heard. When the last note faded, silence filled the room. For a long moment, no one moved. It was as if the audience was afraid that even a breath might break the spell. Then slowly a soft sob came from the front row. Mrs. Whitaker was crying openly, her hands covering her mouth. The mayor wiped his eyes discreetly, and soon, the entire hall erupted into applause. People stood clapping and cheering, some crying, others smiling through tears. Eleanor bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. But she wasn't crying from nerves or relief. She was crying because she felt it, deep in her soul. Leonard's presence, his gratitude, his peace. She looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "You're home now." After the performance, people surrounded her with flowers and kind words. Old residents told her stories they remembered from their grandparents, about how Leonard used to play in this very hall, how his music had made people forget their troubles for a while. Mr. Porter stood near the piano, looking emotional. "You didn't just play a song tonight," he said softly. "You brought back a man's memory and healed an entire town." Mrs. Whitaker came forward slowly, holding a framed black and white photo. "This was taken the night before Leonard left," she said, handing it to Eleanor. "He played here right on this stage and promised he'd come back. He never did. Until tonight." Eleanor took the photo gently, her eyes filling again. "He kept his promise," she said quietly. Later, when the hall had emptied and the echoes of applause had faded, Eleanor stayed behind. The soft glow of the lamps cast a warm light on the piano. She sat once more, her fingers resting on the cool ivory keys. She whispered, Thank you for letting me be part of your story. She played one final note, soft, like a heartbeat, and the sound lingered, wrapping around her like a whisper of peace. As she stood to leave, she picked up the locket, opened it one last time, and smiled at the small photograph inside. "He never forgot you," she said softly, placing it back on the piano before turning off the lights. Outside, the moon hung high, silver and bright, shining over Brookhaven like a guardian that night. People in town said they could still hear faint music drifting through the streets, soft piano notes carried by the wind. Some said it was just their imagination, but others swore it was Leonard Hayes finally finishing his song, playing one last time for the woman he loved, and for the town that never forgot him. The morning after the concert, Brookhaven woke up differently. The air felt lighter, the streets seemed brighter, and everywhere people talked about the music that had filled the town hall the night before. Some said it was the most beautiful thing they had ever heard. Others said it felt like a dream, but everyone agreed on one thing. Something in the town had changed forever. Eleanor woke early, her mind still full of the melodies she had played. She could still feel the vibration of the final note in her fingertips. It lingered like a heartbeat, soft and alive. She smiled to herself, though her eyes were still puffy from crying. She hadn't just played a song. She had awakened a story, a love, and a piece of history that had been waiting in silence for more than 80 years. As she arrived at school, she found a crowd waiting near the entrance. Students, teachers, even people she had never met, all smiling and thanking her. Some brought flowers. Others brought handwritten letters. One little boy held up a drawing of the piano with a golden heart in the middle. "Miss Grace," he said shyly, "my grandma said she remembers that music from when she was little." Eleanor knelt beside him and smiled. "Then your grandma has a wonderful memory," she said softly. Later that afternoon, she went to the town library to return a few books. As she passed by the bulletin board, something caught her eye. It was an envelope pinned neatly under a note that said, "For Eleanor Grace." Her heart skipped. She took it down carefully. Inside was a single page, an old photograph and a letter. The photograph showed a young woman standing in front of the old Waverly house, smiling with a piano behind her. It was Clara Monroe, the woman from Leonard's locket, but in this picture, she was holding something. A sheet of paper. It looked like music. On the back of the photo was a handwritten message. "The day before he left, he gave me this and said it wasn't finished yet." The handwriting was delicate, feminine and aged. The letter was from Margaret Hayes, Leonard's niece. She had read about the concert in an online article that someone had shared from the local paper. "My grandmother was Leonard's sister," the letter began. "Our family thought all his work had been lost, but seeing your performance brought us to tears. My grandmother once told me that Leonard left behind a promise, that his music would return home someday, and it finally has." Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, tears filling her eyes. She couldn't believe it. Leonard's family still remembered him, even after all those years. She knew then that the story wasn't over. There was still more to uncover. That evening, she returned to the school music room. The same golden sunset poured through the windows, casting warm light across the piano. She sat down quietly, placed the locket on top again, and whispered, "You did it, Leonard. Your song reached home." She ran her fingers across the keys but didn't play. She just listened, to the silence, to the echoes of last night's music that still seemed to hum in the air. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Mr. Porter entered with a small box in his hands. "This was delivered to the Historical Society this morning," he said, smiling. "It's addressed to you." Eleanor opened it carefully. Inside was a velvet case containing a medal, an old, tarnished silver medal from the Army, engraved with the name Private Leonard Hayes. Underneath it was another folded note. "He never made it home, but his music did. Thank you," signed the Hayes family. Eleanor's eyes filled again. She placed the medal gently beside the locket, and for a moment she just sat there, surrounded by history, surrounded by love that had traveled through time to find its way back. She realized that what she had found wasn't just about music. It was about remembrance, about keeping the stories of those who came before us alive. A few weeks later, the town decided to hold a small ceremony in Leonard Hayes' honor. They unveiled a plaque near the old community hall. It read, "In memory of Leonard Hayes, whose music carried the heart of Brookhaven across generations." At the base of the plaque, Eleanor placed the locket and the medal. The town's children laid flowers. and Mrs. Whitaker stood proudly beside her, tears glistening in her eyes as the ceremony ended. Eleanor was asked to play one more time. She sat at the piano under the open sky, the wind soft against her face, and began to play the Brookhaven Sonata again. This time it sounded different, not sad, but full of peace. The melody rose through the air, floating beyond the trees and rooftops and into the hearts of everyone listening. When the final note faded, the crowd stood silently, then slowly began to clap, not loud, not wild, but steady and full of meaning. It wasn't applause for a performance. It was a thank you to Leonard, to Clara, and to the music that had united them all that night. Eleanor walked home under the starlit sky. The town quiet and calm, she passed the old Waverly House, now restored and glowing with warm lights. The piano would soon be displayed there as part of the town's history. She stopped and looked up at its tall windows, smiling softly. "You're home now," she whispered again, and for just a second, she thought she heard it, the faint sound of a piano playing somewhere far away, gentle and soft. The same melody she had played in the hall. She closed her eyes and listened. The sound was comforting, like a goodbye and a thank you woven together. In that moment, Eleanor realized that music never truly dies. It waits patiently, quietly, more for someone to find it again, to play it, to feel it, to remember. And so the story of Leonard Hayes and his Brookhaven Sonata lived on, not just in notes and pages, but in every heart that heard it. Because some songs aren't just made of sound, they're made of memory, love, and the promise that even after all this time, nothing beautiful is ever really lost.